Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This is the Easton Press edition, one of these leather-bound ones that I occasionally get through. And it's a true crime novel, really the first of its kind, and it's very well written in numerous ways. You get various viewpoints, various genres in a certain way. Sometimes it's a buddy travel book, sometimes it's a study of law, sometimes it's a study of a small town. But it took, I think, 6 years for Capote to write this. He had Harper Lee along with him to help him take notes. But it's, I think, in general, a very good book. What kept it from being a great book for me is a great book is something that not only do I want to read again, but I can't wait to read again in a certain way because I feel I'm going to get more out of it. When I feel I have squeezed all the juice out of a book, that means that I'm not likely to go back to it again. Just with the reality of there's so many books and so little time that if I'm going to go back to a book, I feel like I'm going to get more out of it. I don't feel that I'm going to get any more out of In Cold Blood, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't read it the first time. This is something I disagree with on Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb is of the school of thought that if a book's not worth rereading, it's not worth reading in the first place. And there are lots of books that I would not reread, but have given me insights and helps in many ways. So that's only one of the many things I disagree with on Taleb, and yet I review his books. So let's get into this. I will say one of the things that I felt reading was a sense of dread. I knew this was a violent, horrible crime, and at some point it was going to be described. And he uses this Ishiguro-like technique, and Ishiguro is not the only person to do it. He's just one of my favorite authors, and he's who I think of when it comes to this, of not telling you the main action of what happened until much later in the book. And I think that's what happened here. So one of the main arguments in the book is nature versus nurture. If I'm raised in a good family, ideally I should be good. If I'm raised in a bad family, I'll probably be bad. And sometimes that's true. But oftentimes it's not. And the counterexample speaks eloquently. Here, as they're talking about the suspect, one of the suspects, one farmer's wife said, "Dick Hickok, don't talk to me about Dick Hickok. If ever I met the devil, steal? He'd steal the weights off a dead man's eyes. His mother, though, Eunice, she's a fine woman. Heart big as a barn. His daddy, too. Both of them plain, honest people. Dick would have gone to jail more times than you can count, except nobody around here ever wanted to prosecute, out of respect for his folks." So even when he had done wrong, people were willing to give him a pass because his parents were so respected. Here is a discussion about one of the families of the criminals, and the lone surviving sister is pondering if, in a sense, her family is cursed. After the departure of the detectives, the composure that had impressed Nye faltered. A familiar despair impended. She fought it, delayed its full impact until the party was done and the guests had gone, until she'd fed the children and bathed them and heard their prayers. Then the mood, like the evening ocean fog now clouding the street lamps, closed round her. She had said she was afraid of Perry, and she was. But was it simply Perry she feared? Or was it a configuration of which he was part? The terrible destinies that seemed promised the 4 children of Florence Buckskin and Tex John Smith. The eldest, the brother she loved, had shot himself. Fern had fallen out of a window or jumped. And Perry was committed to violence, a criminal. So in a sense, she was the only survivor, and what tormented her was the thought that in time she too would be overwhelmed, go mad, or contract an incurable illness, or in a fire lose all she valued, home, husband, children. So in the nature versus nurture argument, am I cursed? This is what this person is asking, who has come from an unfortunate family background and wondering, well, will it happen to me too at some point? To give you some sense of what their family upbringing was like, and when I read it, I just can't believe that children would have been subjected to this, but I'm sure it was even worse than this at times. In another snapshot, Mrs. Johnson was unsure, but she thought probably it was taken at a remote Nevada ranch, where the family was staying, when a final battle between the parents, a terrifying contest in which horsewhips and scalding water and kerosene lamps were used as weapons, had brought the marriage to a stop. She and Perry are astride a pony, their heads are together, their cheeks touch, beyond them dry mountains burn. I mean, I can't imagine the destructive impact such familial actions would have on a child. I can't even begin to. And it does mitigate, in some ways, the criminality of these people's lives. It doesn't excuse it, but it gives it the proper context and helps us understand why it's so important to provide to provide a moral and stable background for children. They're all our future. Children are the future of civilization. And if we don't provide them with stable two-parent families, then we don't have real hope in the future. Now, one of the meta conversations that sits on top of the book is a debate about the death penalty. And I was discussing this book with a dear friend, someone I care about very much. He is someone who is quite committed to the abolition of the death penalty. And one of the points I had made to him was that if something is moral, technology doesn't change its morality. So if something was wrong in the 800s, it would be wrong in the 1800s. Technology doesn't change things. And so one of the technologies that has happened between the 800s and now is the ability to lock someone up indefinitely, securely. Very few prison escapes happen now. And most prisons are not designed like Alcatraz. So there are many, many prisons out there that inmates can be kept securely. And that was the fear in the 800s. They didn't have a secure prison with someone that they could pay to guard a prisoner for 24 hours for the rest of their lives. So the death penalty made all the sense in the world. You have forfeited your right to live in peace with the rest of the community. We cannot be expected to take care of you for the rest of our lives at our expense. We're going to have to execute you. The technology has changed to allow people to be incarcerated forever. That doesn't change the justice of the death penalty. Now, my friend was making the argument that it's about vengeance. In some ways, there is a vengeance being exacted by the state on behalf of God. Now, my friend doesn't believe in God, so that's where the argument might branch off. But my point is, if something's moral, it's moral today, it's moral 100 years ago, it's moral 1,000 years ago. That's just the reality of things. And unless someone can make an argument to me that would have just been just as resonant in the 800s, that we should have disallowed the death penalty and allowed criminal murderers to run around, then I don't see the argument against it as valid. If morality can change, then there's no morality. In Kansas, there is no such thing as life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Persons sentenced to life imprisonment actually serve, on the average, less than 15 years. So this was one of the arguments for the death penalty. If we just put them into jail, they're likely to get out within 15 years. And so to make sure that doesn't happen, that's why we should have the death penalty. I think this is also weak in the sense of, if this is true, then what should happen is legal reform in Kansas. Not, well, we have to use the death penalty since we can't count on this other option. So people should just work harder on reforming the laws. And here, one of the criminals is stating, they're mad because they're not getting what they want, revenge. And they're not going to get it if I can help it. This was during the appeals process. I believe in hanging, just so long as I'm not the one being hanged. And here you have a death row prisoner say that he believes in the death penalty. So this would be another way for me to push back on my friend and say, well, the condemned disagrees with you. What do you say to that? And what else was funny is that when they painted out the scene of the execution, one of the reasons I believe that public executions can be a helpful deterrent is if they are public. That's what was always the case in all of human history. When the death penalty was done, it was done in public for everyone to see. So everyone can see, this is what happens when you do this. Now, I'm not one who's going to say, well, I can only use the death penalty if it's a deterrent. It's just one of the reasons, but that's not the moral basis on which I make the argument for the death penalty, which, if you haven't been able to tell by this point, I'm in favor of. But I don't base my argument for the death penalty on it being a deterrent. It may serve as a deterrent, maybe it won't, but that's not the reason I do it. But if I am going to use it, if I am going to argue for it being a deterrent, it's going to be in public so that people can see this is how justice works. It shouldn't be hidden away someplace private. And listen to this scene. Dewey, this is one of the sheriffs who'd helped in the prosecution of the case. Dewey had watched them die, for he had been among the 20-odd witnesses invited to the ceremony. He had never attended an execution, and when on the midnight past he entered the cold warehouse, the scenery had surprised him. He had anticipated a setting of suitable dignity, not this bleakly lighted cavern, cluttered with lumber and other debris. But the gallows itself, with its 2 pale nooses attached to a crossbeam, was imposing enough, and so, in an unexpected style, was the hangman, who cast a long shadow from his perch on the platform at the top of the wooden instrument's 13 steps. The hangman, an anonymous, leathery gentleman who had been imported from Missouri for the event, for which he was paid $600, was attired in an aged, double-breasted, pinstriped suit, overly commodious for the narrow figure inside it. The coat came nearly to his knees, and on his head he wore a cowboy hat which, when first bought, had probably been bright green, but was now a weathered, sweat-stained oddity. Just how clownish is this entire scene? You have to bring someone in from out of state because you don't even have someone in your own state to execute your own justice. You bring somebody from Missouri who's wearing a cowboy hat, a stained one at that, and a suit that's too big for him. And you have it in some warehouse away from the public, and you have to be invited as a witness. This is a silly and stupid way to execute the death penalty, and I think Capote illustrates it as such in the book. If you're liking what you're hearing, not necessarily the gory details of what you're hearing so far, but if you like this sort of review, consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with people who you know like book reviews, or particularly if you like true crime reviews. This might be the only true crime review on the channel. It might always be the only true crime review on the channel. Never say never, but the other meta commentary, so if there's a meta commentary about is the death penalty valid, another is the insanity defense. If I don't know what I'm doing is right or wrong, can I be held legally liable for that? And I think that's a good question to ask. But what we see in this particular passage is the fact that not only does one of the prisoners know what he did was wrong, but that he's ashamed of it. So this is the wife of the undersheriff, and the way that the jail is located, she takes care of him. She makes the prisoner meals, and she'd gotten to like him over time, as anyone would when you're trying to be compassionate to another human. But after everybody had gone, and I'd started to wash some dishes, I heard him crying. I turned on the radio, not to hear him, but I could, crying like a child. He'd never broke down before, shown any sign of it. Well, I went to him, the door of his cell. He reached out his hand. He wanted me to hold his hand, and I did. I held his hand, and all he said was, "I'm embraced by shame." I wanted to send for Father Goubeau. I said first thing tomorrow I'd make him Spanish rice, but he just held my hand tighter. And so she's a Catholic, and she wanted to bring a priest. This man continually resists these overtures, and she's respectful of that. Remember, Christianity, like I would say most world religions, it's a question of free will. I have to choose it. I can't be forced to take it on. It doesn't mean anything if you are forced to take it on. And yet there's a great moment of humanity and compassion here. It was very moving to see this, that he says, "I'm embraced by shame." And she holds his hand through that moment, not because she's endorsing what he did, not because she wants him to get out of jail, but because in that moment, she understands that he's ashamed, and she doesn't want him to feel alone in that moment. And I find that very, very moving. A wonderful moment in the book. So the last thing I want to talk about, well, one of the last things I want to talk about today is the element of deserve. Because one of the themes that we see here is a transactional way that some people view their religion. If I'm a good person, bad things don't happen to me. And if you're a bad person, bad things deserve to happen to you. You deserve to have bad things happen to you. And yet, this case, in which this very fine, upstanding family, very much seen as pillars of their community, everyone in the family, the father, the mother, and the children, well, if they can have it, is there a God? And this, to me, indicates a very childish view of creation and God. God is only here to give me good things. Nothing bad can ever happen to me. And if something bad happens to me, it's because I deserve it. And if only good things happen to me, it's because I earned it. It's a very transactional way of looking at God, which is, he is far beyond transaction. He is far beyond this way of thinking. And yet this is how people think. And I saw it over and over in the text, and I found it fascinating. This is a scene in which all of the blood-soaked parts of the house, carpet, chairs, clothing, after the investigators had documented everything, this was a time before DNA evidence, so they didn't think to save it. They just wanted to burn it. They took it out into a field and burned it. Everything Herb had earned with the help of God. He was a modest man, but a proud man, as he had a right to be. He raised a fine family. He made something of his life. But that life, and what he'd made of it, how could it happen, Erhardt wondered, as he watched the bonfire catch? How was it possible that such effort, such plain virtue, could overnight be reduced to this? Smoke, thinning as it rose, and was received by the big, annihilating sky. Just a devastating, devastating passage. As I say, this book is very beautifully written, and as much as I dreaded to find out the details of the murder, I couldn't stop reading the book because I found it compelling in many ways. And it's interesting. I've seen some people in reviews say this is totally boring. I stopped reading. Okay, well, to each his own, I suppose. Consider, Mr. Clutter was a fairly young, very healthy man, but his wife, she was a semi-invalid. She slept in a separate bedroom. Produced useful information. Not even the two surviving daughters could suggest a cause for the crime. So they were trying to say, well, his wife was an invalid, maybe he had an affair, but they couldn't. In brief, Nye learned only this. Of all the people in all the world, the Clutters were the least likely to be murdered. And that in itself is an interesting thought, that because you live a good, quiet life, that you're the least likely to be murdered. And this case, this situation was one of the things that shattered that illusion. I don't think people think like that now. But certainly in the 60s, still hung over from the 50s, Leave It to Beaver, Everything's Great, atmosphere, they still believed this. And it's not a bad thing to believe, but it indicated the beginning of chaos that the 60s brought on, not only to the United States, not only in France, not in all the world. The 60s sowed the chaos that we're reaping today in 2025. The last thing I want to talk about is how impressed I was at the detective work. Today we think about the internet, we think about AI, all the things that detectives have at their disposal to solve a crime. And back in the 60s, you had to do a lot of elbow grease. They had to go to Mexico to track down one of the items that could be connected to the murder. Among the elements contributing to Dewey's confidence was the recovery of the radio and pair of binoculars the murderers had stolen from the Clutter house and subsequently disposed of in Mexico City, where, having flown there for the purpose, KBI agent Harold Nye traced them to a pawn shop. So Harold either had to be able to speak Spanish or had to get a translator help him successfully convey what this radio looked like and how to find it in what pawn shop. He had to go all throughout Mexico City to do that. Mexico City is not a small city. Moreover, Smith, while dictating his statement, had revealed the whereabouts of other potent evidence. We hit the highway and drove east, he said, in the process of describing what he and Hickok had done after fleeing the murder scene. And later on, they went on to find other pieces of evidence. But I'm, so impressed with the police. I think the police do get beat up a lot of times for various reasons. But in this particular case and in this book, I want to give them credit. So if you'd like to buy a copy of this book, if I can find a link to the Easton Press edition, I'll put that in the link, but I usually will link to Penguin or some other lower cost edition. If you'd like to buy a copy for yourself, there's a link in the description. There'll be links in the description. It's one way you can support this channel. A free way, which I've already alluded to, that you can support the channel is by hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with people who like reviews of literature, like reviews of true crime, maybe in particular. And it's a free way you can support the channel and get this out to more people. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, there's links to PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee below. If you'd like to work with me on an ongoing basis, there's links to Patreon and YouTube membership. You can contribute monthly and you'll get early access to videos like this one. You'll get a chance to chat with me behind the scenes. And you'll also have the opportunity to get videos that I don't release to the public, that I only release to my members. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, my Amazon wish list is below. If you go to the wish list, you're going to see books for all sorts of genres. If you see them about Palestine, that's for my Palestine bookshelf project. You can navigate over there and check that out if you're interested in learning more about that. You'll see books about France. That's for a project I work on with a friend called The Americans in Paris. But if you see anything else, be it nonfiction, personal development, to novels, to other books on geopolitics, that's for this channel. So buy a copy of that, send it to me using the wishlist feature, and you'll in effect sponsor the video, and I'll do my best to review that book in a timely manner. Until next time, enjoy your reading.